There you go, David. We have Ignition
David.
Houston.
Okay,
David, I have a question for you.
okay.
It's about reaching a session, watching a session on Facebook later on. For some reason, the only thing I get on that page is that it's not available at this time. Do you know anything about this thing?
Yes, I do. And I hate to admit it.
No, that's fine, but so at least you know what's going on.
No, I thought I was a few behind in posting them on YouTube. So I counted them up yesterday. I'm 10 behind. So that's what I have them all lined up, ready to go on YouTube. You know, they have to come from here and from there and whatever. I got them all lined up. And so now all I have to do is push some buttons and they'll be there, but there'll be 10 all at once. And that's one of the 10. So I fell behind and I didn't realize I had fallen that far behind, but I have.
But what happens on Facebook? Because I'm talking about Facebook, not YouTube.
Sometimes I take them down for one reason or the other, and then return it later. Now I'm not sure which
yeah, because I was not here last week on Sabbath. I kind of refused to go to that hell with that guy, but I wanted to watch it later on just to have a better idea of how crazy he is actually. And I could not find the session for last Saturday. And so doesn't matter much on this one because, you know, I have my opinions about his mental balance, I would say. So, but I was wondering, you know, only why it was not there. Okay, fine.
I think last week's is there. I'll double check. If you don't see it one place, try say Branson Legacy Sabbath School links, or try David R. Larson. But I think it's at Sessions, Branson Legacy Sabbath School Sessions. But I'll double check in just a little bit.
I'll check. I'll check right now.
Okay, be a little easy on my good friend.
Yes.
It's very difficult. It's very difficult. I cannot believe that this Adventist system has its the main educational channel, which is the Sabbath school around the world, being supervised by a guy like this. Just that would tell me never study that lesson. I'm very honest because
let me push back a little bit, George. Let me push back a little bit.
No, push back.
Last week, he did something that I thought was very interesting, but the group didn't pick up on it. The group wanted to go around the circle on creation and evolution yet again. All right. How many times do we have to go around that circle? But what he did was fascinating. He defended an absolutist Adventist position by appealing to scientific relativism. Now that was an interesting move, and I wish we could have discussed that with him, because it seems to me that if one embraces scientific relativism, as he did with the writings of Thomas Kuhn and Popper and so forth, if one takes on scientific relativism, I don't know how one prevents oneself from taking on religious relativism as well. And so I would like to have, he actually was making an interesting intellectual move. If we were playing chess, he made an interesting move that I think we can discuss further. But anyway, Cliff has his own style, and if you're concerned about that, go to the internet, and there's a philosopher in Europe called Zizek. And he makes Cliff look like a rock. This other fellow is so exuberant. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, I'll try to get caught up, George.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Here we go to Romans chapter 8, New Revised Standard Version. I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory about to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, and not of its own will, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay, and will obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning in labor pains until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly while we wait for the adoption, the redemption of our bodies. For in hope we are saved. Now, hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what is seen? But if we hope for what is not seen, we wait for it with patience. Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. For we do not know how to pray as we ought, but that very Spirit intercedes with sighs too deep for words. And God, who searches the heart, knows what the mind of the Spirit is, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. Okay, let's pray. We cannot help but wonder, God, what was it that beset Paul so severely that he could not articulate his pain? All he could express was groans and moans, and yet he had confidence that those inarticulate vocalizations could be translated into intelligible concepts, and you would understand it. We need to have that assurance today. We don't have much to say, but we do groan and we do moan and we do sigh and we do express ourselves in these inarticulate ways. And we pray and we know that these will be translated into intelligible thoughts that can be communicated. For that, we give our thanks in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
Well, it is a difficult day for all of us. Just 2 weeks ago, on January 22, Dr. Brian Bull was with us, and he gave a response to McKinley Addy on the issue of medical errors. And I thought it was a very helpful response. And one of the things he pointed out is that as medicine advances, the likelihood of errors increases because knowledge makes it possible to detect more difficulties, and also knowledge makes it possible to have a larger range of possibilities, clinical possibilities, therapeutic possibilities. But he also brought up how sobering the statistics on marriage are. That is, it looks like if one divides the number of marriages there are in any given state by the number of divorces there are, it looks like it's about a 50% ratio. Now, it's not quite that bad because people who have been divorced are more likely to get divorced again. And those who have been divorced twice are more likely to get divorced a third time. So some people are running up the numbers. And so the average person walking down the aisle after the wedding ceremony has a better than 50-50 chance of making, but still the numbers are quite sobering. And he pointed out that what happens in marriages apparently is happening quite closely in therapeutic medicine as well. Now, I must say, and I told him this subsequently, I said, you looked a little ashen, and you looked like you were under some distress. But once you started speaking, your normal color seemed to return, and your normal vigor did as well. I don't think that he knew then, or that anyone knew, that he would be in the hospital shortly thereafter with pancreatitis. And of course, that's like saying you have a headache, right? That's like saying the pancreas has a headache. It hurts. But that can be caused by many, many different things. And the worst thing that it can be caused about is pancreatic cancer. And it seems to me, as one who is not a doctor and who just observes this from the outside, that sometimes, often, actually I would say often, it is my impression that pancreatic cancer isn't picked up until it's well on the way. And it moves swiftly. And it often moves painfully. So today, Bronwyn received an update from the family about how things are going now, and I'll turn it over to her to share with us what she can.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, it was a shock to find out earlier in the week that he had been in hospital and was stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and at the time was in an awful lot of pain. And he is now home. I spoke to one of the family this morning. He's at home. He's resting well. He is stable. And I told this person that when David sent out the notice on Facebook and in the email, that there are prayers ascending from around the world for Brian and his family and the other members. And this person was very, 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 very warmed by this. So let's continue to pray for them and the extended family as they are just in shock. This just happens so fast. As this person said to me, he was traveling in the Galapagos just recently. We went here and we went there, and he's just been very active tennis player all his life. And then all of a sudden this happens. So his 2 daughters with them, one's a doctor, one's a nurse, and they are there to help take care of him. And he's only been given months to live, but we just don't know. So let's continue to pray for them, and thank you.
Thank you. I told Brian that I would pray for him. And I said, I don't really understand the dynamics of intercessory prayer, but I am persuaded that it does more than make me feel better. And so I'll pray. And I know you folk are as well. Does anybody want to say something about this situation before we turn to Hebrews? Terry, did you want to say something? Oh. Okay, then let's turn to the letter.
Can I say something?
Sure, Dana. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'm kind of new to this community, so I don't know Dr. Bull for a long time. But as a hospice chaplain, what touched my heart was the fact that you shared this news with us. In a medical community like Loma Linda, when somebody that is important and high up goes through a difficult time, usually this news is kept behind closed doors. So the first surprise, which was heartbreaking one was that he was sick. And the second surprise was that you decided to share this news with us. And I think it's important because it gives us the possibility to share the burden, to comfort the family, to pray for them. And in the process, we become more than an intellectual community. We become a real community of people of faith. We become a family. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dana. You're such a healing presence in all of these experiences, and so encouraging to all of us that we really are blessed by your participation in our family. You know, Brian's a friend of ours, but I've often said to this class, we walk in the midst of greatness, and sometimes we take each other for granted, but actually were these people on any other campus, they would be dealt with far more, I don't want to say respectfully, but with far more appreciation than we sometimes give each other. It's very clear that Dr. Bull was one of the leading scientists in the world in his field. Mm-hmm. And yet we enjoy him on our Sabbath school, something that's quite extraordinary, really. So we've been blessed by him in many, many different ways. Anybody else? Ruth, are you about to say something? No? Oh, you are. Okay. We need you to unmute yourself. I'm sorry, Ruth, we still can't hear you. You're still muted. Huh. I don't know why, Ruth, but you're still muted.
She could hold down her space bar one talk.
Oh, that's right. If you hold down your space bar, that should help. Huh. Okay, well, maybe we'll have to come back. If you find a way to unmute yourself, we'll come back, okay? And raise your hand or somehow let us know that you.
I got it.
There you go. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Brian was a classmate of mine at Walla Walla. And was a very good friend of mine and has been. And his sister is also a very close friend of mine. So this has been a really hard time for me.
Yes.
I had also read his article and had sent a note to him that I had just, as I read it, I thought, I was smiling because I realized how really truthful he is to himself and to everything that he's doing. And it was, and then I found out about, and this was soon after before some of the rest of you knew. So it's been a really hard time. And he's a very special person.
Yes, thank you for letting us know that. I see that Carmen Lau's with us from Alabama, I think. And I bring our attention to her because she's the new chair of the board for the Adventist Forum, which publishes Spectrum magazine. And were it not for that, many good things would not be possible. It's hard to imagine what the denomination would be like today without that. And it's going to continue to make a positive contribution. And I'm really pleased as someone who's been invested in the venture for a long time in different ways. I'm glad that she's taking over just now. So welcome, Carmen. Do you want to say anything?
Well, I popped into this class time and again during the pandemic. And so thank you for putting it online. It's been a real blessing. And, you know, I just grieve thinking about Dr. Bull's decline and the, you know, the hardship that he is facing. And I feel a sense of awe for him, you know, and his intellect and how he has been fearless in following, you know, rational thinking, staying committed to faith. And so I guess I just, you know, I kind of feel a sense of responsibility to carry on, but a sense of inadequacy at Spectrum. But, you know, we all are indebted to him for his tenacious search for truth. And, you know, I think we all are committed to do our part to carry forward, because we think that's God's way, a fearless searching for truth and grappling for, you know, reconciliation between faith and science. So, I mean, I'm inadequate, but I just wanted to join in and see you folk today when I read the news.
Thank you so much. And I think, like I suggested in something I wrote for the group the other night, Spectrum is always in a crisis. And so you have taken over when it's in a crisis, just like it's always been. So thank you for taking that over. And I think the future is very bright. Okay, let's see. Did anybody else want to speak?
Ruth wanted to say something again, David.
I just want to say thank you to Carmen, because she's a very helpful person and I've appreciated her very much.
Good. Okay.
Hello, David.
Yes.
This is Michelle. I don't share things very often with the class, but I was a pathology resident back in the early 80s. And Dr. Bull, of course, was the chief of the department. And I just want to share a little impact that he had on my life that was very significant, that had nothing to do with his amazing mind as a scientist. But I had 2 children during residency, and he very graciously allowed me to have a significant amount of time off and then to do residency part-time after I had my children. And that had a huge impact on my life. So in addition to his amazing contributions scientifically and in other ways, he had a personal touch on me. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, anybody else? All right, over to Hebrews we go. Let's see if we can make some progress on that topic. My goals for this morning are really quite specific and focused, and that is, I'd like to show that this letter is accessible and that this letter is practical. Those are the 2 things I'm hoping to establish. And so we'll move through this material quite easily. I think my basic idea is that reading Hebrews is sort of like putting together a jigsaw puzzle. I don't know if I should have said jigsaw, putting together a puzzle, say 1,000-piece puzzle. And if one has the big picture of what the puzzle is supposed to be all about, one has a good idea, at least a little bit better of an idea as to where to put those different pieces. Now, if one does not have that big picture, one can still put the puzzle together, but it's more difficult, and one will make more errors, and one will become more frustrated, and so forth and so on. So when we're reading the letter to the Hebrews, I think it's really important to keep the big picture in mind, and can go into the details to the extent that it's helpful to do so, but let's keep coming back to the big picture, if at all possible. So I have here something I would like to put up on the screen. And let me take that down. So here's a quick overview. When we start a text like this, we often ask, what are the lower criticism issues? And by that, we mean a study or an analysis of the text itself, the actual manuscript of the text. And I think we probably should stay away from the word criticism because it does not have the same notation or connotation in English as it does in German. And so I prefer to talk about textual analysis. But then we have higher criticism, which I would prefer to call contextual analysis. And we therefore find out who the author was, to whom it was written, under what circumstances was this document written, and how does this document compare with other documents that seem to be somewhat similar. But there are virtually no issues of a lower critical nature with Hebrews. It seems like the manuscripts are pretty well intact. There are some who say that the last portion of the letter could not have been written by the author because they sound more like Paul than does the rest of the letter. But I know of no manuscript evidence that those verses were not part of the letter from the very beginning. So that's an interesting thought, but it doesn't take us too far down that street. On the higher criticism issues, the contextual analysis, there's virtually no information. We don't know who wrote this book or this letter. We don't know to whom it was sent. We don't know under what circumstances it was sent. That is, we don't have any information external to the letter itself. That's why I put down virtual. We can discern much of this from reading the letter, but there are very few things that we can know about it other than that. Some of you have done as I have, and that is to read Dr. William Johnson's dissertation at Vanderbilt University, Divinity School, on the letter to the epistles. And I opened it up quickly wanting to know how he handled this issue of the authorship of this letter in his dissertation. And I had to smile when I saw it. He began by saying, well, Origen was right. Origen died at 254 AD. Origen was right when he said, only God knows who wrote Hebrews. And William Johnson said, nobody has improved on Origen's conclusion in all the hundreds of years since then. And that was good enough for his dissertation examiners. They didn't want to be hung up on that issue, but they moved right ahead anyway. One thing we do know is that a document called First Clement, written by Clement of Rome, about 95 AD. He was the Bishop of Rome between, say, 88 AD and 99 AD. And sadly was banished by Trajan to Crimea, which is in the news today. And there he was eventually put to death by the Emperor Trajan, who did not like it that he had been a successful evangelist in Crimea as he had already been in the Roman area. But about 95 AD, about 4 years before he died, Clement wrote a long letter to the Christians at Corinth, and he was admonishing them because they had taken some of their leaders and moved them out of office and put other leaders in their place. And Clement thought that what they did and how they did it was not the right thing. So he wrote this long letter. But it's interesting to us because in it, he has big chunks in his letter from the letter to the Hebrews. And so that's about 95 AD, which is pretty early. Think of it. That would be about 60 years after we think Jesus lived and died. we can all think back, not all of us, but many of us can think back 60 years, doesn't seem that long ago. Some people will date it before the fall of Jerusalem. That would put it before 70 AD, because it is presupposing familiar knowledge with the priestly system that seems to be continuing in the mind of the author of Hebrews. But I think that that's unlikely. I think that probably Clement is giving us the earliest reliable indication of how long that letter has been around. So now, what I would like to suggest would be, first of all, that the letter is comprised with a very simple but elegant organizational scheme. That is, throughout the letter, comparisons are made between Jesus Christ and other people. And the argument all the way along is that Jesus Christ is superior to this one, superior to that one, superior to that one, superior to that one. So if one gets that format, it's pretty well in place. And it seems to me that these are not just like this, but each one builds on the other, so that when we get down to talking about Melchizedek, we're a long ways into a more complicated issue than we are at the outset when we're talking about the prophets and the angels. But that's the basic structure, and it's, I think, quite accessible. The second thing I would like to say is that in between and sometimes interspersed these big chunks of material, there are words of practical advice. And what I've just said, those two things would not be at all controversial, that it is structured in these different ways, and also that there is this practical material along, interspersed and between these other materials. But what is, I think, a little bit different from what most people say is this: I am persuaded that the practical stuff is the main story, and that the theoretical stuff is there to support the practical stuff, which is just about opposite from the way most people read it. Now, why do I think that? Well, for one reason is I was once reading the book or the letter, and I came to the end of it, and there was some practical counsel, and it just clicked for me. It said, oh, this is what the epistle has been all about all along. And now I can see its practical importance. The other thing, though, a second thing that has caused me to think along these lines is that New Testament scholars are increasingly seeing this practical material in all of the letters as the aim of the letter as a whole, and not simply sort of the implications of the best part of the letter. If we think of Romans, for instance, over hundreds of years, the idea has been, well, Paul develops in Romans a very thorough account of the salvation. When he comes to the end of Romans 11, when he says all Israel will be saved, after he has redefined what it means to be a member of the tribe of Israel, then, it sort of declines into mere ethics. That's been the pattern, the way of reading Romans for who knows how long. But increasingly, New Testament scholars are saying, no, the argument goes sort of like this. It keeps going up and up and up. And the practical material is what Paul had in mind at the very outset. So if we really want to understand that, we need to pay attention to the practical material. And I've just taken that pattern that's going on in New Testament scholarship and applied it to the letter to the Hebrews. But thirdly, and most importantly, I think we hear from the author of Hebrews himself or herself. Parenthetically, some people think it was herself. Maybe Phoebe wrote it. Close parenthesis. This is what the letter says very near to the end. I appeal to you, brothers and sisters, bear with my word of exhortation, for I have written to you briefly. People smile when they read this, for I have written to you briefly. But the author says, my purpose is very practical. It is to give you some exhortation. I think other translations use the word encouragement there, and my looking at the dictionary suggests that I would prefer encouragement there. bear with my word of encouragement. And it looks like the author of Hebrews was writing to Christians who were getting tired. They were Jewish Christians, and they had been Christians for a while, and it was becoming uninviting. It's not so much that they disagreed with what they had been told when they became Christians, but it just didn't seem to have the vibrancy. It didn't seem to have the vividness. It didn't seem to have the sparkle as it once did. And they were in danger of sort of slipping back into their previous Judaism. And therefore, the letter to the Hebrews argues that maybe they should not be so swift in becoming disappointed in Jesus Christ, because when one considers it, Jesus Christ is superior to all of these, and by virtue of that, superiority can be a source of comfort to us. So there's a direct link, I think, between what the text says about Jesus and what it wants to say by way of encouragement to us. These are not totally discrete. Now, I looked at the lesson quarterly for this time by the general conference. Too bad we didn't have a chance to talk about this with Cliff. But the introduction goes through and I think marvelously summarizes what Hebrews says, and it totally leaves out all this practical material. And I'm inclined to say, well, that's too bad to leave it out at all, but it's really too bad to leave it out because I think that's the most decisive material there. It's sort of like when we go to the Oscars, we have the award for the leading actor, but we have the award for the supporting actor. And it seems to me that the leading actor here is the practical material, and that the supporting actor would be the more theoretical material. So what I'd like to do is just to go through quickly and identify these different people with whom the text compares Jesus, and then come back and read some of the practical counsel that goes along with it. Let me see if I can get over here and get to my scroll so it can more easily. Okay, so the first one that Hebrews compares Jesus to is the prophets. Long ago, God spoke to our ancestors in many and various ways by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by a Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom he also created the worlds. And then the argument goes on a little further. This one is not too long, goes on a little further, showing how Jesus is superior to the prophets. Okay, we scroll down. Now we get to the angels. And it says, having become as much superior to angels as the name he has is inherited, is more excellent than theirs. So now we're going to get a rather detailed comparison between Jesus and the angels, which will argue that Jesus is superior. And I'd like to just move through this one in a little more detail than we won't do so with the others. So here are several different lines of argument that are designed to establish the superiority of Jesus over the angels. Okay, of which of the angels did God ever say, "You are my son, today I have begotten you"? Or again, when he brings the firstborn into the world, he says, "Let all God's angels worship him." But of the angels, he says, he makes his angels wings and his servants flames of fire. Here's another one. But of the Son, he says, "Your throne, O God, is forever and ever, and the righteous scepter is the scepter of your kingdom." Okay, and then it goes on to talk about the creative activity of God, Jesus Christ. Then down to verse 13. But to which of the angels has he ever said, "Sit at my right hand until I make you enemies, I make your enemies a footstool for your feet"? And then it says, "And are not all angels spirits in the divine service, sent to serve for the sake of those who inherit salvation. Now, this is not where the discussion of angels ends. It continues for a while. We'll come back to that in a little bit. Then we go down here. We're skipping through, and here we are down to verse 16 in chapter 2. For it is clear that he did not come to help angels, but the descendants of Abraham. All right. So that's first we have the prophets, then we have the angels. Now we get to Moses. Yet Jesus is more worthy of glory, is worthy of more glory than Moses, just as the builder of a house has more honor than the house itself. And then in much detail, the argument proceeds showing how Moses is indeed surpassed by Jesus. And this, I'm not going to go through the details here. You can do so on your own, and you won't get lost. If you keep the big picture in mind, you won't get lost. But if you say to yourself, whoa, I need to get all this clarified before I move forward, without looking at the big picture, being that the superiority of Jesus over Moses, it's very easy to get lost. Then, thirdly, or fourth, I guess, we had the prophets, then we have the angels, then we have Moses. Here's four, the high priest. And the letter is going to suggest that Jesus is superior to the high priest. So you see the pattern going through here. And it says, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who in every respect has been tested as we are, yet without sin. So Jesus is a high priest that identifies with us more fully than the others. But see, it goes on and on about how Jesus is superior to the high priest. Then we get to Melchizedek. Now, a lot of people would say Melchizedek should be under the section of the high priest. I think not. I think we ought to separate Melchizedek out a little bit, because the argument here is that Jesus is superior to the priests, but he is also superior to Melchizedek, to whom the priests were inferior. So you have the priest, then you have Melchizedek, then you have Jesus above Melchizedek. And why is that? It goes into an argument about how Abraham paid tithe to Melchizedek after all, and that suggests that Melchizedek had this superiority. So again, when we turn to Melchizedek, we're seeing an even more strident, even more strong claim that Jesus is superior. So now we keep moving, and we get down here to another one. This time it is, here we go. See all this about Melchizedek, all this about Melchizedek. You can see we've moved through quite a few verses, and here it is still. He's explaining to us why Melchizedek is inferior to Jesus, or that Jesus is superior to Melchizedek. Now, get down to the whole issue of covenant. And the argument here is that Jesus is the guarantor of a better covenant. So we have the old covenant, the new covenant is better. This one is quite involved with the sanctuary. So the covenant theme and the sanctuary theme sort of get interwoven here. But the same argument is there, that the covenant that Jesus provides is better than the covenant that has been previously provided. So now we can get into a big discussion about all the details of that. But again, keep the big picture in mind. It's always how Jesus is superior to these others. Then we get the sanctuary. So the sanctuary is the true tent of the Lord, not one that any mortal has set up. And he goes on and on about the sanctuary. We get back to the covenant, and so forth and so on. So here we are. Now we need to be mindful of this, because when we get into the discussion of the sanctuary as Adventists, we often get caught up in the details of what's going on here. But once again, we need to back up and ask what's going on. What's going on is that the letter to the Hebrews is arguing that the heavenly sanctuary is superior to the earthly sanctuary, just like the heavenly covenant is superior to the earthly one, just as Melchizedek is superior, Jesus is superior to Melchizedek and to the priests and to Moses and to the angels and to the prophets, all the way back. So rather than getting too involved in the details there, let's keep to the big picture. Now he goes into some detail, or she does. And then we're going to get down to sacrifices. Okay, I don't want that there. All right, okay, so let me pull back down where we were. For Christ did not enter a sanctuary made by human hands, a mere copy of the true one, but he entered into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God on our behalf. So there's the sanctuary, and then we turn to sacrifices. And here the argument is that the sacrifice that Jesus makes for himself on our behalf is superior to the sacrifices that the priests performed in their ministries. And interestingly enough, and I think of some encouragement to me, the letter points out that the priests had to make sacrifices for themselves and not just for the people, because the priests themselves were sinful, and Jesus did not have to do that because he was not sinful. Also, a difference is that the priests repeated these sacrifices ritualistically over the years, but in the case of Jesus, he does it just once. So again, the pattern, I think, is a clear pattern, and I think it's quite accessible. Okay, so all this has to do about the sacrifices. Then I would like to go back and pick up these blue portions, because they are the practical portions. What I've just shown would be the comparisons which establish the basic pattern. But now let's go back and read the practical portions and read them straight through without having them divided by these other things. So this is a very short one in chapter 2. Therefore, we must pay greater attention to what we have heard, so that we do not drift away from it. Okay, the people are inclined to drift away from it. Have you ever been tired of being a Christian? You know, have you ever said, I don't believe it anymore? It's not that I don't believe it anymore, but it's sort of getting boring, tiring. Years ago, I had a friend who said, you know, the Christian story doesn't work for me anymore. He didn't say he didn't believe it, but it just didn't do much for him anymore. This is what these people were apparently experiencing. For if the message declared through the angels was valid, and every transgression or disobedience received a just penalty, how can we escape if we neglect so great a salvation? It was declared at first through the Lord, and it was attested to us by those who heard him, while God added his testimony by signs and wonders and various miracles, and by the gifts of the Holy Spirit, distributed according to his will. So we need to be mindful of what we have heard from the beginning. So now we go down to the next practical portion of the letter, and here it is. Take care, brothers and sisters, that none of you may have an evil, unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God. That notion of an unbelieving heart, an evil heart, or sometimes it says a hard rock, or a hard heart, or a stony one. Don't be that way. Don't be so insensitive to others that you're like a rock. Don't be so unreceptive to others that you're like a rock. Don't have an unbelieving heart. But then, this is one of the main themes of the letter. But exhort one another every day. Encourage one another every day, as long as it is called today, so that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. For if we have become partners of Christ, if we only hold our first confidence firm to the end, as it is said today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as rebellion. So interesting. One of the themes of Hebrews is that we really do need to get together. That is a recurring theme. Then particularly if we find our Christian vividness starting to become a little dull, all the more important to get together. And if we don't get together, we have a tendency to become sort of hard-hearted. And now he is talking about the wilderness here and how the people of Israel were about to enter into a rest, presumably going into Canaan, but because of their waywardness, they weren't going to do that. And he invites us to go into the rest that God has promised us. Therefore, while the promise of entering his rest is still open, let us take care that none of you should seem to have failed to reach it. Now, this verse 2, really is interesting to me. It says, for indeed, the good news came to us just as to them. Right? The good news, in other words, the good news first went to them and then it came to us. And I think we need to keep that in mind when people say only those who have explicitly acknowledged and expressed their loyalty to Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior will be saved. These people did not have that knowledge of Jesus Christ, but the good news, some people translate it, the gospel came to us just as to them. But the message they heard did not benefit them because they were not united by faith with those who listened. Okay, so we keep moving. Trying to pick up this practical material. Get down here to where I can scroll it. Continuing the same thing. So then, a Sabbath rest still remains for the people of God. For those who enter God's rest also cease from their labors, as God did from his. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one may fall through such disobedience as theirs, that is, the children of Israel. Now, the Sabbath here, referring to the seventh-day Sabbath, is also referring to the sort of culminating rest that the people of Israel were anticipating, but forfeited because of their disobedience. So we ought to strive for that rest. Then, let us therefore approach the throne of grace with boldness, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. I think this is what the letter to the Hebrews is all about. Everything else is, I think, aiming toward words of encouragement, such as these. In times of need, receive mercy and find grace. Pretty good, I think. All right, keep moving. Now, this one I think is really fun. And it's a little bit sobering as well. The author says, about this we have much to say that is hard to explain. If I remember correctly, this is related to the argument about Melchizedek being superior, or Jesus being superior to Melchizedek. About this we have much to say that is hard to explain. But notice, since you have become dull in understanding. So the problem is not the difficulty itself of what's being said, but people have become dull, not too bright. They really aren't attending to this as they should. And when they attend to it, they're not doing it with the kind of intellectual sharpness that they should. Okay, then he continues this, what I find really funny. For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the basic elements of the oracles of God. You need milk, not solid food. For everyone who lives on milk, still being an infant, is unskilled in the word of righteousness. So you're dull, you're unskilled. But we keep reading. It gets, I think, even more interesting. But solid food is for the mature, for those whose faculties have been trained by practice to distinguish good from evil. Then he gives us his idea of what these basics are that we seem to be stuck with. And they are, I think, startling what he says we should not be stuck with. Therefore, let us go on toward perfection. In the context, it's clear that he means maturity there. Therefore, let us go on toward perfection, leaving behind the basic teachings about Christ and not laying again the foundation. Okay, he's not saying we should never do it once, but once we have laid down the foundation, we shouldn't linger there. We should move on and build something on that foundation. But what is this? What is it that we should not get stuck at? Repentance from dead works and faith toward God. Have you heard enough about righteousness by faith in your lifetime? I think I have. It's not that it's unimportant. It's very important. It's one of the basics. Repentance from dead works and faith toward God. There's nothing more basic than that in Christianity. But Hebrews says you must move on. Also, instructions about baptisms, laying on of hands. What's that? Ordination, resurrection of the dead, and eternal punishment or judgment. So what I think he's saying here is to go to the Roy Branson Legacy Sabbath School and grow, learn something. Go to Sabbath school thinking you might end Sabbath school learning something that you didn't know before you arrive. I know in some circles that seemed like a startling idea that one would actually learn something in Sabbath school, but the text is saying we need to keep studying and keep studying new things and keep studying new things in new ways and not just keep going around and around and around and around and around the same old questions and giving them the same old answers as though we're going to make any progress that way. We need to move on and study new materials and ask different questions and not get so routinized that it's not that we can't answer new questions. That's not the problem. It is that we can't even ask new questions. That's a really challenging situation to be in. But unfortunately, oftentimes Christians are in that position, and I think sometimes we are. It's really hard. It's really hard to get a group of Adventists to look at an issue from a different angle and not just come to that issue with a paradigm of expectations as to what the possible answers are. And then we have a big debate as to what the best of these possible answers are, when in fact, maybe we should back up and look at it from a different point of view entirely and let the paradigms with which we have come to this material sort of go into the background, at least for the moment. Now, again, let's emphasize righteousness by faith is basic. Basic. But there's more to the gospel. Then he's a little more encouraging. He says, even though we speak in this way, beloved, we are confident of better things in your case, things that belong to salvation. For God is not unjust. He will not overlook your work and the love that you showed for his sake in serving the saints as you still do. And we want each of you to show the same diligence so as to realize the full assurance of hope to the very end. How we can have a study of Hebrews without landing on this material with full force is, I think, a puzzle. And now here's another line. This is why we should keep studying. You can't be a growing Christian. You can't be a Christian at all if you're not a growing Christian. It says, so that you may not become sluggish, but imitators of those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. So we are dull. We are lacking discernment, and we are sluggish. No wonder the Christian life has become boring. We need to keep pushing forward, and it will become exciting again. Okay, let's keep going down. We're almost here to the end. Okay. Now earlier I skipped over Hebrews 11, where all those people who acted in faithful ways are to be remembered, and I hope I can pick it up there. Let me just go back real quickly because I seem to be missing that. I don't know. But as you remember, it's about different people. By faith, Moses. By faith, Samson. By faith, Gideon. By faith.
You need to go forward, not backward.
Am I going the wrong way?
Yes.
Thank you, Simona. Here we go. Hopefully it's there. I thought I got it all in. Okay, let's go down a little more quickly. Before we get there, therefore, my friends, since we have confidence to enter the sanctuary by the blood of Jesus, by the new and living way that he opened for us through the curtain, that is, through his flesh, and since we have a great priest over the house of God, we move forward. Let us approach with a true heart and full assurance of faith, with hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. That was the theme of Dr. Johnson's dissertation, this idea of our bodies being washed with pure water. And he compared this theme in Hebrews with that theme in other religions, using the phenomenology of religion approach. So it's fascinating to see how in many different religions, the idea of being washed clean with pure water is a prominent one. Let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who has promised is faithful. And here we go again. And let us consider how to provoke one another to love and good deeds, not neglecting to meet together. There's that theme, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. For if we willfully persist in sin after having received the knowledge of the truth, there remains no longer a sacrifice for sins, but a fearful prospect of judgment and a fury of fire that will consume the adversaries. Okay. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. Then it has them remember when they were persecuted, but recall those earlier days when, after you had been enlightened, you endured a hard struggle with sufferings, sometimes being publicly exposed to abuse and persecution, and sometimes being partnered with those who were so treated. For you had compassion for those who were in prison, and you cheerfully accepted the plundering of your possessions, knowing that you yourselves possess something better and more lasting. Do not therefore abandon that confidence of yours. It brings great reward. There's that theme. Don't give up. Don't slide backwards. Don't get discouraged. Move forward. For you need endurance, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what was promised. For yet in a very little while, the one who is coming will come and will not delay. You're right, Simone. Here we go. But my righteous one will live by faith. My soul takes no pleasure in anyone who what? Shrinks back. all this knowledge about, don't get discouraged in the Christian life. Move forward. Don't shrink back. But we are not among those who shrink back and so are lost, but among those who have faith and so are saved. Now, thank you, Simona. I got myself in the wrong spot here in the text. And I've just highlighted a few things. Now, what I want to emphasize here is that in Hebrews 11, we often think of faith as an answer to doubt. But actually, in Hebrews 11, I think faith is an answer to cowardice. The opposite of faith in Hebrews 11, I don't think is doubt, it's cowardice. So now faith is the assurance of things hoped for the conviction of things not seen. Indeed, by faith, our ancestors did this. By faith, we understand that the worlds were prepared. Then, here we go. By faith, Abel, by faith, Enoch, by faith, Noah, by faith, Abraham. You know all the stories that will follow these references. By faith, Sarah. And then we go down to by faith, Abraham. By faith, Isaac. By faith, Jacob. By faith, Joseph. By faith, Moses. By faith, Moses again. By faith, Rahab. And then, how can we miss this passage and just slip over it? We can't, because it shows that the passage is about courage and strength in adversity. It's not about perplexity and doubt. Perplexity and doubt have their place, but that's not what the passage is about. And what more should I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms. It doesn't say who through faith settled their doubts. Who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched raging fires, escaped the edge of the sword, won strength out of weakness. That's what the letter to the Hebrews is all about. Winning strength out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received their dead by resurrection. Others were tortured, refusing to accept release in order to obtain a better resurrection. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned to death. They were sawn in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, persecuted, tormented. This is not doubt. This is adversity. Of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains and in caves and in holes in the ground. Right? The letter to the Hebrews is saying they're getting a little discouraged in the Christian life. Think about these things. They wandered in deserts and mountains and in caves and holes in the ground. And all these, though they were commended for their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better, so that they would not, apart from us, be made perfect. Then, okay, back to the practical portions again. Strictly speaking, I think of that as the theoretical portion, but I suppose it could go either way. Therefore, in view of all that we've said, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us. And then this gets down into a lot. Looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the sake of the joy that was set before him endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such hostility against himself from sinners. Why? so that you may not grow weary or lose heart. There's the theme of Hebrews. Don't grow weary or lose heart. All of this is very interesting material along that line. Now, it talks a lot about discipline and the importance of discipline. And then here, I think, are words that are really, really important in Hebrew. Therefore, lift your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. All right. He's giving them some exhortation that's more than an encouragement. He's saying, okay, enough of this being an invalid, spiritually speaking. Get up, move, and move forward. Pursue peace with everyone and the holiness without which no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and through it many become defiled. Bored Christians often become bitter Christians, and they cause trouble. See to it that no one becomes like Esau, an immoral and godless person who sold his birthright for a single meal. Okay, keep going. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us give thanks, by which we offer to God an acceptable worship with reverence and awe. For indeed, our God is a consuming God. Then, the last chapter. Let mutual love continue. It's been there, but make sure it continues. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that, some have entertained angels without knowing it. If your Christian life is becoming a little dull, have some friends or people who are not friends over for Sabbath dinner. Show some hospitality. Remember those who are in prison as though you were in prison with them. Those who are being tortured as though you yourselves were being tortured. Let marriage be held in honor by all, and let the marriage bed be kept undefiled, for God will judge fornicators and adulterers. Keep your lives free from the love of money, and be content with what you have, for he has said, I will never leave or forsake you. So we can say with confidence, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can anyone do to me? Remember your leaders, those who spoke the word of God to you. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Do not be carried away by all kinds of strange teaching. For it is well for the heart to be strengthened by grace, not by regulations about food, which have not benefited those who observe them. Food offered to idols. Do not neglect to do good and share what you have, for such sacrifices are pleasing to God. Obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls and will give an account. Let them do this with joy and not with sighing, for that would be harmful to you. Pray for us. We are sure that we have a clear conscience, desiring to act honorably in all things. That doesn't mean to act perfectly, to act honorably. I urge you all the more to do this, so that I may be restored to you very soon. But then, okay, it finally ends. Now, I tried to put together a short list of what the practical suggestions here are. I think number one, it says, remember what you once heard. Remember those who acted heroically before you. Be receptive. Don't have a stony, hard heart that's insensitive and unreceptive. By all means, congregate. Get together. That's a major theme in the letter. Be hospitable. Study. Keep on studying. if one doesn't know more about the Christian life a couple years from now than one knows today, one's slipping back. Encourage each other, approach God confidently. Now, let me go beyond Hebrews and just comment from my own about what it means to encourage each other. This is, this is not what Hebrews says. This is what I speculate encouragement to be. We encourage someone, first of all, when we see him or her. When the person feels noticed. When the person is aware that we're aware that he or she is there. So many times people don't feel noticed. They feel missed. And it's so encouraging just to be noticed. Secondly, listen. Listen. It's so encouraging not only to be noticed, but to be heard. Thirdly, say something. Say something helpful. Don't do that too soon. No. Notice, listen, then maybe say something. And then help out if you can. I think those are all ways of encouraging people. Now, let me give you just a really coarse example of this, and then we'll quit. Last week sometime, a friend of mine from first grade decided to take a trip. So we went up to Angeles Oaks, just a day trip. Went up to Angeles Oaks, had breakfast there, went down a very twisty road from Big Bear down to Lucerne Valley. It's very twisty, 10 miles an hour on the curves. When I got down to the bottom, even though I'd done everything possible to prevent it, I was quite motion sick. And so we traveled across the valley with me being motion sick and stopping a number of times along the way. Eventually, we got to a service station, gas station, way out there in the middle of the desert. I have no idea where it was. We pulled into the gas station. I was riding, I wasn't driving. And my friend was pulling up to the gas pumps. And I opened the door very quickly and sped as far as I could, as swiftly as I could, to the desert sand, because I wanted to be away from everybody when I was feeling so ill. And I didn't realize that I had become dizzy in the car and that I had lost my balance. And so I got out there in the desert quite a ways, but then I really lost my balance and I fell. And I was there just kneeling with my hands on the ground. And I said to myself, well, if I just wait here for a little bit, the dizziness will go away and my balance will return. So I'll just be quiet here. I won't do anything. I'll just be quiet. So that's what I was doing. But then I saw off to my left the boots of a woman dressed in Native American garb and her long skirt. That's all I could see of her. And she said things like this: "May I help you? Would you like me to call 911? Do you have any friends that I might contact on your behalf? Would you like me to take you to a motel where you can rest?" So forth. And each time I said, "Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. But I'm confident I'm just motion sick. And if I wait here for a little while, I'll be okay." And she kept asking me, could she be of help? And I thanked her for her willingness to be of assistance. Then she turned away and started to walk away. And she turned back and she said, "Would you like my cane?" All right. Would you like my cane? And she was not only offering me a walking stick, she was telling me, I know what it feels like to lose your balance. I'm with you on this. I'm a person who has also fallen down. So I'm not approaching you as a stranger. I'm approaching you as a fellow sufferer. And I want you to know that I have something that has helped me when I've lost my balance, and it could help you now that you've lost yours. I never saw that woman's face, saw only her boots, only the hem of her garment, which is clearly the garb of a Native American woman in some tribe out there in the desert. But I will never forget her because she offered her cane, and in offering her cane, she offered herself. Now, I think that's what Hebrews is all about. And I feel distressed sometimes when we ignore these more practical portions of the letter in favor of something else. Okay, I think that's all I have to say. What time is it?
We have, it's 10 to 12 right now, David.
Oh my, I'm way over. Okay. Although it did get started sort of late, didn't it? So shall we take 10 minutes for us?
Just take 10 minutes. If anybody has a question, raise your hands and I'll put you on our queue.
Okay,
We
thank
come
you.
back at, what,
Noon?
just make it 10, 5 after, I think, would be
Okay. All right.
12:05. So anyone wants to raise their hand, just raise it and I'll put you on the list. And Dana, I will mute myself.
Good.
Adventist for every 3,000 people. Forrest,
Yes,
this is a good time to start?
you got 30 seconds.
Okay. Maybe I can, when my 30 seconds are up, I can just take a look at this introduction to our lessons for this quarter.
Okay, was this from the quarterly?
Yeah,
Okay.
these are the opening paragraphs for the quarterly. And I think they illustrate the point I'm trying to make.
Okay, 30 seconds are up, David. You can start.
Okay, these are the words at the beginning of the quarterly for this term. We're all studying around the world the letter to the Hebrews, which I think is a great thing. And here is how it begins. It says that the argument of Hebrews is that Jesus is the ruler of the universe. He is the exalted high priest. Now, it doesn't go on to talk about Moses and the angels and Melchizedek and so forth and so on. Maybe that's in the various lessons for the week. I haven't looked. And then it says it's not about what Jesus does, but also who he is. Our eyes are attracted to the one in the center of all, who amazingly enough looks like us because he had become one of us. I'll go gentle on this idea that Jesus looks like us. He's a cosmic Christ. So in some ways we resemble each other, but we're not cosmic Christ. He had become one of us. Jesus, our brother, is there in heaven representing us, despite the shame of our sin and fallenness. Then this is interesting. In the person of Jesus, three dimensions of the story of redemption intersect. The first is the local personal dimension for readers tired of the reproaches and hardships of the Christian life. Jesus is the author and perfecter of faith. That's the part I've been trying to emphasize. The second is the corporate or national dimension. The third is the universal dimension. Jesus is the new Adam, the Son of Man, in whom God's purposes for humanity are fulfilled. The portrait of Jesus, who captures the breadth and length and height and depth of God's love for us, is our subject for this quarter. Now, I think that that is really helpful in many ways. One can imagine a study of the book of Hebrews that would lead in less promising directions. Now, I haven't seen the whole quarterly. This is just the outset of it. But I think this is a very promising overture. But what strikes me, in addition to that, is that how little emphasis is put on the practical portions of the book. There is that line, for readers tired of the reproaches and hardships of the Christian life. Jesus is the author and perfecter of faith, but it's not in the book just the reproaches and hardships. It's the dullness, it's the sluggishness, it's the lack of enthusiasm. It's kind of what I call Christian fatigue that is being experienced and is being addressed. So I have no objection to this. It looks pretty good to me, but I wish there would be more emphasis upon what I think is the central point of the book, and that is that we be encouraged in those moments when we are tempted to be discouraged. Okay, that's it for me.
Yeah, if I could just tag on to what you just said, David.
Sure.
I read an article this week, I've forgotten, New York Times, but this person was advocating for church attendance in spite of COVID. And her argument was basically, we need to come together in community. And we can't quite do that as well online as we can in person. So I think, there's probably merit to that argument, to be together physically, if at all possible.
Well, sure, if we can get together physically,
Yeah.
that's a good idea. And we as a class need to get back to the Centennial Complex as soon as we can. I've been reluctant to do that for a lot of different reasons, but I think we really should aim for April 1, first Sabbath in April, because we really do need to get together and see each other. Now, we have made a lot of friends over Zoom over these last few months, and we will bring Zoom with us so that they can participate just as they are now, albeit will be in the Centennial Complex.
Yep.
I would add one other thing. There's a group that meets after this session ends at 12:30, and they keep conversing. Last time they talked till 2 o'clock. And I think that's a good thing. It's a good thing for people to interact that way. I think that's in harmony with what the letter to the Hebrews says.
Okay, I have Dr. Tishi. Are you ready to ask your question? George?
Oh, George, yeah, that sounds better. Thank you, David, for this marvelous presentation. It's probably one of the best that I've seen on Hebrews. I was debating during this past 10 minutes if I should address what I'm gonna address or not. So, it's a marvelous message in Hebrews. It's my favorite book. It's changed my life, my theology, my thinking through the years. But unfortunately, the message of the book has been distorted, and I say corrupted, by the Adventist Church. I don't have to get in details, everyone knows about that. And so there is, in my view, no hope of change, because every time that a new lesson comes about, it's the same reinforcement, all the doctrine of 1844, investigative judgment and all that old stuff. Why is it, in your opinion, if you agree with me, I don't know, but if you agree with that, what I said, why is it that this church, our church, has been so reluctant or totally reluctant to depose the weapons and accept the message in Hebrews as it is, without distorting it, without creating a new theology that's not there, without creating actually an opposite theology to what is there, to a point that, I myself, I quit. I don't discuss about this anymore. I just don't pay attention to the Adventist doctrine anymore, because it's in my view, absurd and a waste of time. What would be your comment about what I just said?
Well, I'd like to respond in several different ways. One, I'm happy to hear that the letter to the Hebrews has been a blessing to you over the years. And it has done so despite the ways that you have found it presented unpersuasively. That's good news. Now, the other question you asked, though, is probably one that I should refer back to you, because it's really a question in the behavioral sciences, isn't it? You asked,
Hello, how are you? I'm good.
why are people so reluctant to change? And it seems to me that that's a psychological question, that's a behavioral science question, maybe anthropology, maybe social psychology, whatever. People are reluctant to change for a lot of reasons, I suppose, and I'm going to get into your field here, and I need to be reproached if I'm getting too far into it, and that is people are afraid. Change is frightening, and so they are going to hang on to what they know and want to protect that greatly. I'll be straightforward on this. My father, I thought, had some of this going for him. The Adventist Church meant so much to him, because it gave him what he needed in his early life. It gave him stability. It gave him a family. It gave him a sense of direction. It gave him a meaning for life. Therefore, anything shook that cage or unsettled the complex of convictions that had meant so much to him, I think was frightening. Now, he was not a man who looked like he was frightened by anything, but it was deeply disturbing to him. So he would defend, I think, far longer than it was necessary, some of these traditional ideas, because the complex of convictions that were part of the Adventist world meant so much to him. And I would say to him, I'm not so worried about change in the Adventist Church, because I've always been an Adventist, always will be an Adventist, and I don't have the same apprehensions that you do. And he allowed that probably was the case. Now, third thing, though. First, I'm glad you're reading Hebrews. Secondly, that this is really a psychological question, and I think it has a lot to do with fear. The third is that we are dealing with a founding story here. Every group has a founding story that sort of helps it identify itself. So when we are dealing with traditional views, traditional Adventist views on the sanctuary, so forth, we're not dealing with any story, we're dealing with the central story. And therefore the anxiety is collective and not just individual. There's an angst there, there's a fear there that if we change on this, we will lose our direction. And one often hears, this is the only distinctive truth we have, and if we lose this, we lose everything. Well, no, that's not the case. How many Adventists, there are 20 million Adventists around the world, how many of them could explain the 2,300 days?
Yeah.
What, 1%?
Barely, probably.
Yeah, so it's not a living factor in the lives of most Christian Adventists. I guess it's something they have to learn it when they become baptized, but after that, it's really not a part of the Adventist life, and therefore to think that Adventism could not continue if it started to view things differently on this matter, I think is an exaggeration. It's already not being attended to very much in the Adventist world. Now, how does one replace it? I think one does not replace it by attacking it. That just creates, if people are afraid, that just creates defensiveness. I think one changes it by trying to present what one thinks is the best reading of Hebrews and hope that that over time takes care of itself. That's how we dealt with Arianism. No, we didn't have any big conferences on that I know of on Arianism and so forth, but gradually people became persuaded that a more orthodox view of the Trinity was better than Arianism. So I think it's a pedagogical thing, but that takes time. But the idea that we're, if we lose this, we lose everything is at the core of this anxiety, and I just don't share it.
The fear is always, is obviously a central point. Do you think that the fear may be related to egocentrism, I would say, narcissistic, a little bit of narcissistic tendency? If we change this, we lose something that will show us that we are not superior to other people, other Christians, other religions. We need to be best because we were chosen by God to be the church at the end of the time. And the end of the time is not happening for 170 years. A fear of losing this privileged position. What do you think? Could be?
I'm sure. Again, I am on your turf here. As a behavioral scientist, you could understand that more clearly than I do. It does seem to me that Adventists have a sort of a curious dynamic on this. On the one hand, we like to think that we're the greatest people on earth. Then on the other hand, we like to think we're the worst people on earth. It's kind of we think that our problems are worse than the problems of any other denomination, when in fact that's not so. We're pretty ordinary, both in our excellencies and in our faults. So this, I don't know what one calls that psychologically, when one claims too much for oneself on the one hand, and then one depreciates oneself too much on the other hand. It's kind of a strange dynamic, but Adventists cannibalize Adventism more than Methodists cannibalize Methodism, and that's the opposite side of claiming too much for it. But the future rests with those, I think, who will present the best reading of Hebrews they can provide, and over time, I think less helpful ones will wither away. They've already withered away in practical Adventism. Now they need to wither away. When I went to the seminary, Ed Turner's here, I don't remember a class on this matter. Ed, do you? No. And
not at all, no.
And I also, Forrest was there at the seminary. Now, maybe they're having such classes now, but they weren't, you could study for 2 or 3 years and get a master's degree and never hear a word about it.
No, you're right. We didn't get the 2,300 days that we went to field school.
There you go. Yeah.
Right, George, can I move on to another?
Yeah, please do, yeah.
Thank you. Now, this person didn't raise their hand, but they did make a statement in the quote. And Ellen DeRico, did you want to comment on your chat, Ellen? I guess she's not. Here's what she says. Sometimes I feel like religion puts one in an emotional quote unquote straitjacket. We make things so complicated. It's really just about loving one another and helping each other for no gain of our own, so people experience love.
Yeah.
Do you think that's kind of what you were saying, the author of Hebrews is saying? Ellen, did you want to speak, or? I guess I've lost her.
Okay, well, that's for sure. Any church that has 28 fundamental beliefs has made things a little too complicated. Absolutely, we need to get it down. You know what do the Muslims have? 5 pillars. I think the Buddhists have 4 great noble truths. The Catholics have 7 sacraments. We have 28 fundamental beliefs. That's a little too much. We need to get it down to where a 7th grader can know what the concerns of our denomination are. And that would simplify things a great deal. Now, the other thing, though, she said, it's not only that it's too complicated, and that it's too restricting. And that's a trait of an unfortunate religion. Religion ought to be liberating, ought to be freeing, ought to be, now I'm not saying liberating in an immoral way, but to believe in God is to have a much bigger universe than one might have otherwise have had. So it should be a source of renewal.
All right, now I'd like to go to Rod Corker.
David, thank you for the blessing of today. I'm wondering if we as a class can find and craft a practical application of the lessons from Hebrew in relationship to our classmate and dear friend, Brian Bull. What would be the voice of an angel to Brian from the class at this time? I think I would want to say to him that we will be with him throughout this journey, whatever the journey is, and that we will not leave him or forsake him in this time of trouble. But I wonder if you think it's appropriate that we send him a class message that we could agree upon. This has been a key part of his life and journey.
I think it would be most appropriate. And my only question is how to do this and what should be the form it takes. You know, one way would be for someone to convey that to the family. I'm not sure how responsive he is now. Maybe he is. I don't know. Another way would be to have some written statement that can be part of the family's permanent collection of materials and be shared with him. I think it's a great idea. I'm not quite sure how to move forward. What do you think?
I agree with that. We could send you our thoughts, and that could be a compilation that he could read or others could read to him. I would certainly trust you and Bronwood to craft something on behalf of the class. But I do feel the need, I do think there's merit and strength. I do think there's an application of the Hebrews in terms of the exhortation that we should find an application whereby we are living the Hebrew message.
I think that's wonderful. I like that idea. If a number of people could write a brief paragraphs and email them to us, then we could put these together and add some comments of our own, and then convey those. I see George says a collection of statements would be great. So here's the email address again. send them to us, and do this as swiftly as you can, right after this session is over.
Yes.
Otherwise, it will slip away in the midst of other things we have to do. So the place to email these would be Branson Legacy Sabbath School at gmail.com. It's that simple. Branson Legacy Sabbath School at gmail.com. And if you can send us something, we will put it together and get it to the family. And hopefully they'll be able to share it with Dr. Bull.
Thank you. Thank you, David.
Ron, when I saw your hand up, did you want to respond to that, or do you have?
I was just going to second what's been said by Rodney and David. I think that's a wonderful idea that we do something as a class. And yes, I've already been looking at get well cards or thinking of you cards. So I think this is a wonderful idea, and the more we can get, the more the nicer it will be for them. I think he will really treasure it, and the family will too.
You know, don't think you have to write this gorgeous essay.
No,
or nothing. Just say thank you. It's been a pleasure to have you in our class. I've learned a lot from you. A single sentence that you wrote anything at all is what is going to matter, not how long it is or how eloquent it is.
Two lines, two sentences.
yeah. Some of the things that we'll put up on Facebook this week after Dave made the announcement were just perfect. Some of them were just beautiful. Something like that.
Dana's was one of those,
Yes.
All right, we will do that. By the way, Bronwyn, would you just put that address in the chat so that people could maybe copy that?
Yes, I can do that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bronwyn. I'd like to go to Terry Dunder. Terry?
I was just going to comment that I'm not really very hep on it, the Adventist church being the only way. It seems that Christianity itself is being looked at now by the world rather critically because of where we wound up. And we have seen, it seems to me anyway, wound up exactly where the Israelites were, with many, many sects. But now that it's a much bigger world now, we have many more. And I think we need a Hebrews for Christianity. And maybe we could write it directly for ourselves, because it's time for us to go back to the better way. Melchizedek was clearly an example of a priesthood that was other than this flock.
Exactly.
Christ himself said it. I have sheep that are not of this flock.
Exactly.
We write this for ourselves and free ourselves from both the complexity that we've built into it for our own aggrandizement and move on.
Both things. That Melchizedek was not a child of Abraham. That's so important, so important. And in fact, Abraham was deferential to Melchizedek. Also, that the people then received the gospel before we did. But then I really want to pounce on your last lines. Move on, move on. I think that's what Hebrews is all about. Move on, keep moving.
Well, I would go a step further. I'm not sure that, and I've said this in other places, maybe not here, I'm not sure if Christology can be rescued from religion. Okay? Religion is tied up in its own way with its own business. It's all about the money, the power, who controls what. We've got 7,000 different denominations. Isn't Babylon religion? We've always said it was false religion because we were the only truth. But Babylon is religion. And it's time for us to preach to ourselves.
Well, so much depends upon what we mean by religion, but surely one of the meanings of religion is perversity. I think of Karl Barth, who said religion is sin.
Well, yeah.
Religion is sin.
Well, you've alluded to the 28, right?
Well,
You've alluded to the 28, right?
religion is sin. So now Paul Tillich would have said, no, religion is the marrow of culture and culture is the expression of religion, but he's using the word very differently. The way you're using the word is much more like Karl Barth was using it. Yeah, it's a good point. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I'd like to go. Okay, now, David, we are at the bewitching hour, and I have 3 hands up. Did you want to take these, or what did you want to do here?
Why don't we do the 3 and then conclude? As I say, there's a group that meets afterward, and let's kind of let that be chapter 2 of every Sabbath morning, and let that move forward, and people can join in as they wish to.
Okay, so I want to go to Dana at this time.
I was smiling earlier. I thought it's so funny how Dr. Larson was trying to prove his point by reading from the quarterly. To me, it was like Melchizedek trying to prove his, to validate himself by making an appeal to the priesthood of Aaron, you know? So,
Okay.
Anyway, I think this conversation comes to prove the need for another conversation about the relativism of the theological relativism. And we embrace the idea, we as Seventh-day Adventists embrace the idea of present truth, but we want that present truth to be unchanging. This is maybe the greatest idea that I learned in school at Loma, that present truth is constantly changing. And I'm looking forward to that conversation. I think your idea to have such a conversation is wonderful, and it's so needed in the church at large.
Thank you, Dana. Now, how to make us more comfortable with change? I think one way to do it is to have history courses in which we trace how much we have changed already on so many things. We have the idea that we have not changed at all since 1844, and then that makes us fearful of making any more changes. One could even have a course on the history of Adventist thinking about creation. That has changed over the years too. But on a lot of different topics, we could have a course called the Development of Adventist Theology that would trace these changes and prepare the way for us to make more changes as necessary. Now, change for the sake of change is not what we want, but when there's an opportunity to move forward, we would be ill-served not to take that opportunity.
Yeah, it's learning and growing.
Yep. Thank you. I think
I want to go to McKinley.
Okay.
There, McKinley?
Yes, I'm
There
here.
you are. Okay.
That's what I heard. McKinley was driving down some highway somewhere.
At 85 miles an hour.
For us, we only do conservation driving. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Dr. Larson, for the class presentation today. I have 2 comments, and I don't know how to order them. The first has to do with Dr. Bull, but there was a time when comments were being made about that, and then there's a comment on your presentation. So do you have a suggestion how to order that, or should I just proceed?
Let's hear about Dr. Bull first, because that's more important.
Thank you. Okay. So I don't know much about Dr. Bull and his work or family, but for the few times I interacted with him, I found him gracious and very thoughtful. I appreciated his comments on the presentation of January 22nd, of January 22, 2 Sabbaths ago, on medical errors. And I look forward to discussing with him the issue of scientific uncertainty, which I think many people not in the scientific community and some in the community miss in ascribing to science a lot of undeserved credibility. Now, Dr. Bull, in his comment on the presentation, mentioned marriage the marriage statistic as a proxy for medical errors. And I thought to share a few comments about marriage from the experience of people who have been married to engineers. I couldn't find the comments at the time, but very quickly here, if you just bear with me. So this is from one person in Santa Barbara who had written into an Ann Landers column. And she said, my husband, the engineer, has no tolerance for the gray areas of life. He sees everything in absolutes. It's black or white, right or wrong, yes or no. Never it may be. He feels no joy, but he is never depressed either. Everything must be in perfect order or there is heck to pay. It is not easy to live with such a man. And then from the female perspective, my wife is an engineer. She is precise, analytical, and definite in her views. She always thinks before she speaks. She's as cold as ice and so sure of herself. She makes me sick. My next wife will probably be an empty-headed, bubbly moron, and it will be a relief. Now, in contrast to those, here's another one. You are darn right. Engineers are different. I'm still happily married to mine after 35 years. They tend to look before they leap and have stable marriages. By nature, they're problem solvers, sensitive and caring. The woman who wrote to complain ended up with the wrong man, not the wrong profession. Last one. Let's see here. Just bear with me here. Okay. My engineer husband doesn't send me flowers. In fact, some days we don't even have a decent conversation, but I'll take this nerdy looking guy with his assortment of pens, eyeglasses, cases in his shirt pocket, his dull tie, and wrinkled trousers over any of the men I've ever known. He's loyal, decent, dependable, and real. He'll never cheat or lie. To me, that's worth a lot these days. I mention these because in his comments, again, Dr. Bull sort of used this idea of the marriage statistic as a proxy for medical errors. And since we're talking about an engineering standard for reducing medical errors, I thought that these comments would kind of apply. Now, I have a thought about acknowledging Dr. Bull that I will share with Bronwyn and Dr. Larson so they can decide how they want to approach that. Okay, that's the comment about Dr. Bull.
Excuse me a minute, David, I've got to leave, so I'm going to turn this over to you and Bronwyn, okay?
Okay, thank you, Forrest. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thanks, Forrest, and sorry for the little extended comment.
Not a problem. As long as you're in witness protection, I feel okay.
All right.
Next, you said there were 3 people. Who's on board? Oh, he's already gone. Okay.
Okay, I'm the last person, David, I think. Okay, here's my quick comment about your talk. Thank you very much. I liked how you highlighted a big point about Hebrews, which is to grow in understanding, build on the fundamentals, grow in grace, and grow in knowledge. I think we as Adventist Christians miss that point quite a lot. We spend a lot of time talking about the fundamentals and not how we can build on them. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And thank you for your active leadership and participation in the subsequent conversation. I put it on the schedule so people can note that it's there and people can join in. We typically can't, and I think it's helpful to have a different leadership for that session. So as soon as we've had the benediction, we'll turn things off, and then the ones who can stay by can do so and talk as long as they want. Zoom will turn itself off after it doesn't hear anybody speaking for a number of minutes. So you're welcome to stay as long as you want. Here's the benediction. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Dave. And
thank you,
hello,
Dave.
and hello, class part 2.
Yeah, here we are.
A minute, I want to make sure we're off on
Recording.
Yeah, here's the recording. It's still recording. So let me, okay, over here it says stop recording.